All right. So good evening and welcome to week 2 of Trauma-Informed Approaches to Care and Practice. Sorry, I'm just getting myself organised. Before we kick off, I just want to make sure, I know that they've changed a bit of the way, when I say they've changed the format on the Moodle. And some people seem to be having trouble finding any announcements. And the announcements, it's important to know where they are because they're pretty important, because that's where I'm going to put stuff that you might want to know about. I know you guys, you three, have been around for a little bit, so I don't know if you've noticed that there's a change and you've been able to find everything okay. But I'm just going to show for anyone else that's not on here to make sure that you're finding what you need to find. So just bear with me while I'm going to have to just close that PowerPoint down because I want to share my screen instead of the PowerPoint. Just let me open this up. All right. So share my screen. All right, so you should be able to see that now. So that's your community space, your weeks. Announcements are now will be over here. Okay, so you'll see them here, and that's where anything that I put up. So you've got to have in here so I've put this up already tonight, which will have your recording and PowerPoint in there. So the PowerPoint's there, and the recording will be there later tonight. So that's where you need to look at for the announcements. So that's where anything that's going on that I want you to know about, that's where you'll find it on the left-hand side of the screen. So if something happens and I'm unwell or I can't get to class, that's where I'll put a notice up saying, hey, I'm not coming. I'm not going to be there tonight. So it's important for lots of reasons to know where that is. I just noticed there's been a few people in my last class who just weren't really sure where it was. So I just wanted to show that, and hopefully that solves the problem for people. As I said, I know it's been the other way for years, and I know particularly for the 3 people that are online that you've been around a little while. So hopefully you've picked up that it's moved spots. So just let me again reload my. All right. So Helen, I was just explaining to people where that you find the announcement section. I'm not sure if you know that or not, but if you go back after this, and if you're not sure, just watch the recording when it comes up, and when it's available to you, and just in the first couple of minutes it shows you where they are, just in case you haven't been able to find them. But it's basically when you're looking at your Moodle, it's on the left-hand side of the screen. So you'll see there's a column down there, and anything that I post up, it'll end up in there. So you'll see it. And same if a student asks a question, it'll end up in there. All right, so welcome to week 2. I just said in my other class it's only week 2, but for some reason it already feels like it's been longer, but I just don't really know why. But I'm sure for you guys it's probably you're pretty busy trying to get yourself into the groove and get your head around what you're doing for the semester. What we're going to look at this week is basically intake and assessment, okay? And hopefully get time to have a look at a bit of a case study. So I guess, it's really important when we're thinking about any type of work we're doing with clients, we need to be able to assess their needs. So assessing needs, like I said, is a really important process. And it's basically, it's a process of gathering information from the client. So getting that information that we need to be able to do the work that we need to do with the client. So once we get that information, what are we going to do with it? Well, we have to think about how do we apply that information to the service offerings to determine whether the organisation can actually meet the client's needs. Okay, so that's really important as well. So it also captures data. So it captures data at a point in time that can be revisited on a regular basis to chart progress and how the organisation is supporting the client to meet their goals and objectives. Okay, so really, if we think about intake and being able to assess the client's needs, we've got to get that information. Without that information, it's pretty difficult for us to progress and be able to do anything that's worthwhile. So like we said, intake's the first part of the assessment process, and it's the first contact that you'll have with a client. And it can take part, it can be done in different ways. So often the first point of call can be a phone call. Okay, so it can be someone ringing up to say that they're looking for a service. And so it takes place over the phone, but other times it will happen in person. It just depends on the type of the service. Okay, so sometimes the intake might be just ringing up to say, I need the service, and an appointment might be made for you, and you'll go in. Other times we will collect a lot of information at that particular point to decide whether the organisation to decide whether they can actually assist the client or assist a potential client. And it requires specific skills to be able to do intake. Okay, so you have to be able to ask questions. You have to be able to get the information that you need. And I find that people that are really good at intake know they know they've got a form to fill out, but they're very conversationalist in the way that they're asking questions. So often when we first start doing intake, we can be very robotic because we're not really sure of what we're doing. So we're going through a form and we're saying name, date of birth, address, obviously, as we get more skilled in that area, we're able to be more conversationalist in the way that we obtain information. So we know the information that we want to obtain, and we're starting to build that relationship with the client. So intake is the first point of contact with the client, and it's really a point where you start to create a relationship. So it's a really important aspect of the work that we do. It's also about the conversation is about determining whether we can actually meet the client's needs. Okay, so if our service, for example, if the client's going to need an occupational therapist or a speech therapist, and our service doesn't provide that, or then we may need to consider that we need to think about saying to them, our service can't assist you. However, here's some options for you. So the intake process is also about determining whether that service is applicable for that client and we can help assist that client's needs. Because if we can't, then there's no point bringing that client into our service. It can be part of considering cultural needs. So we can actually consider the client's cultural needs. Do we need to have a male worker or a female worker available? Do we need to have someone who can speak the language? Do we need an interpreter to be involved in the space as well? So these are all the things that we're determining in this role of intake. Also, considering are we in a community where people may, a small community, so particularly if you're talking cultural, but even in country areas, is it likely that the client will know people? So how do we consider the best option for the client so that we're ensuring their confidentiality as well? Like I said, it's about gathering that information in a way that's supportive, without going into not too much detail, but sufficient detail to get the information that we need. So those communication skills need to be there. It's not really at the start of it's not really a counselling session, but you may need to identify whether there's things that need to happen to support those clients. So if we identify that it might be a mental health need, for example, that could appear to be urgent. Do we need to talk to them about what they might need to do in that space, or even make a referral on their behalf to say through the mental health helpline, for example. So some of the things we need to consider in this space is explaining the process to the client. So it's fairly critical that we explain the process to the client. in setting up how the intake or assessment is going to work. So consider how you explain confidentiality to the client, or the way in the service will use and store information. So those things around privacy and confidentiality are really important. You might also look to explain the setup. That isn't a space to go into a lot of detail. It's not going to be a counselling session. It's really just to work out which practitioner might best suit you, whether this service suits you, whether this is the right place for you to be able to get what you need. You might explain, you also might, explain to them that it's okay to take a break if they need to, if it becomes a little bit overwhelming. Because remember, we're thinking about this from a trauma-informed space. Okay, so when we start going into things, it may be triggering for people, and they may have difficulty considering the different types of things that that you want to discuss, or talking about the different types of things that you want to discuss. So it's also about being disciplined in how you obtain the information, thinking about, again, of those trauma-informed principles, thinking about how we create that safety, the trustworthiness and transparency, collaboration, empowerment and choice and peer support, and where we consider what going into an assessment looks like if we haven't done our background reading and what this can impact. Okay, so making sure that we're prepared for that, so that we are able to have a situation where we're providing respect for the client and we're creating that safety. Okay, so as it says, thinking about, again, the points that are on the screen, familiar yourselves with the client's basic background and details beforehand, particularly if they're coming in. They're any type of cultural background that might be relevant, so how we're going to greet them. This is for face-to-face, of course. Think about the types of questions you might ask and whether you need to use open or closed questions. Okay, provide emotionally and psychologically safe space, and that you sought consent to share information to relevant agencies or partners. Okay, so sharing consent is really gaining consent is really important as well. Consent is obviously paramount when we're working with people, and making sure that consent is informed, so that they understand that if you're going to say, do you consent to sharing this information with whoever, that they actually understand what that means, so they're not surprised when they might get a phone call from someone else who says, I believe that you're looking for some support with mental health. Okay, so that they actually understand that. Empowering questions are really important as well. So again, we thought about what types of, doing your homework, doing your background checks, your background preparation, making sure that whether you're going to use open questions or we're going to use closed questions, but it's also about being empowering questions that identify help move into that strength-based process where they're able to provide you with or feel empowered in the questions that you're asking them. So there's some examples on there. I won't read them all out, but have a little bit of a read through them as I'm talking. And what you're doing with these is that you're allowing them the opportunity to discuss what it is that they need and where they see that their strengths might lie, and where they might see that they want assistance with. So, have there been occasions when you've worked through similar problems and that we can call upon to help with this situation? Okay, that's a really good, not only empowering question, but a good strength-based question, because what we're doing there is trying to identify what it is that they may have strength in. Okay, so often clients won't identify strengths. They often will operate in a deficit place, or from a deficit point of view. So if we're able to ask those empowering questions, it gets them to start talking about the things that they see that are positive, that they didn't even realize that are positive. It then helps us to build on that in other ways. Things like, what resources do you have? So who's around you that can help with this situation? Are there ways that can be helpful to you, so you can communicate negotiate effectively for yourself. Okay, so using those empowering questions to really let the client think that they're supported in the space that we're working with them. So let's have a little bit of a think about this. So Yvonne is 84. She lives in a retirement village with her husband and carer Bill. Yvonne was diagnosed with Alzheimer's 3 years ago and has experienced an increased level of cognitive decline recently. She now requires reminders about personal care and cannot be left alone. Yvonne recently broke her foot and is unable to walk as a result. When you meet with Yvonne to make an assessment of her support needs, you notice she is wincing in a wheelchair. Yvonne softly moans and seems to be in a lot of pain. You also notice her husband and carer Bill seems quite impatient with Yvonne, and you overhear him telling her to shut up and stop complaining. You never stop whining. So what might you need to consider when undertaking an assessment with Yvonne? So one of the first things I guess you want to consider is safety. Okay, so it's about safety of Yvonne and Bill, including their emotional safety. Okay, so obviously we may have some concerns for Yvonne, but we also have to consider what Bill's situation is here as well. So it may be that that we need to think about how we can gain the information without making either feel as if they can't participate. Remembering obviously that Yvonne will have her own set of difficulties in terms of that she could have with her Alzheimer's. But what we're really doing is gathering information. And so gathering the information, if Yvonne's able to give you any information, we want to get information from Yvonne. But in this situation, we may have to rely on getting information from Bill. And so we have to, once we're getting that information, we have to weigh up what the quality of the information is, what there is to support the information that we're getting as well. So if Bill says that she has difficulty doing ABC, we might ask him to explain that in a little bit more detail so that we can have supporting information around that. So what the types of questions that we're going to ask are going to mean that we're going to have to use our communication skills. Okay, so we're going to have to be doing active listening. We're going to have to be asking open-ended questions to elicit the information that we're going to need to do the assessment. We're also going to have to think about what the capacity of Yvonne is to participate in assessment. And capacity is really important when we think about working with an individual. An individual needs to have the capacity to be able to, one, understand what you're asking them, two, to be able to consent to participate in the process. And when that capacity doesn't exist, then we have to consider how we can get that information and get it accurately. So when we think about situations like this, what we're thinking about is that observation is really important. So using our sight to see and our ears to hear and listen. So observation is really important in assessments. And to conduct a good assessment, we need to be able to think about things like body language, the level of distress and interaction that the person's having with the staff, what family members might provide insight into their support needs. What is the person's body language like? Is it relaxed? Is it tense? Is it shut off? Do they seem distressed? If so, is it about a particular topic or personal situation? So, again, those things are important, particularly if you're talking to someone in the presence of somebody else. Do they feel comfortable to talk in that space? Do you sense that the person is not able to provide you with information because there's somebody else is there and that may be stopping them from talking? Is somebody dominating the conversation? Is the person who you're assessing not getting the opportunity to answer the questions? Is it that that somebody else is dominating the conversation and trying to talk for them? So I guess the visual assessment is only part of it. Part of making a good assessment is also not jumping to conclusions based on your own assumptions. So it sometimes can help ask family members questions if appropriate to build a bigger picture. So I think, like that, I think what it says there about not jumping, or what I've just said about not jumping to conclusions is really important. I think it's like listening. If you're already starting to think about what's my next question while somebody's talking, you're not listening. You're actually you're concentrating on doing something else. So it's the same about not jumping to conclusion, because we don't know until part of the assessment is weighing up all the information we have, and it doesn't mean that we have to make a decision there and there on the spot. It may mean we need to go away, we need to consider the information we've got, combine that with any other background information that we've been able to gather, and then try to come up with a logical assessment based on factual knowledge and objective information rather than subjective information that's influenced by our values and assumptions. And it may mean we then need to gain more information to be able to conclude the assessment. But it's still also really important. Like I said, it's important. Observation and listening is still really important. Observation is still really important in letting us see things that we might, or letting us wonder things that we mightn't see. So even if you think about in child safety, or looking at the dynamics of coercive control and domestic violence, those observations can be really, really important. I remember many years ago, in a child protection role, but interviewing a family, and I could really see that there was some coercive control by one partner over the other, and you could see that one partner would look to the other partner for, I guess, validation before they answered a question. One partner was doing all the talking. When you directed the question to the other partner, as I said, they would be very reluctant to answer, and when they did answer, their body language was indicating that they were seeking permission to be able to provide those answers. So observation is still a really powerful tool in this space. When we're thinking about assessments, we're also thinking about risk factors. Okay, so part of our assessment is thinking about what the risks are that are there. So a risk factor is anything that will increase an individual's risk of harm, illness, or injury. So in community services work, they can be fairly specific and predictive. So there's often assessment tools that help us do that. So for example, a history of being subjected to violence and a history of trauma may increase the individual's vulnerability to substance addiction, or a history of previous contact with child protection agency, or being subject to DV or substance abuse could be predictive of a person's future contact with child protection agencies. So we know that via our ACE study, for example. So when we assess these risk factors, we should take into account all the information that we know so far from various sources, and then consider the weightings of these. Secondhand information should be, for example, is not as credible as firsthand. So we should weigh that up. Like I said, we need to be able to make decisions based on factual knowledge and be objective in our decision making. Protective factors are also really important when we're doing an assessment. We want to think about what exists in terms of a person's environment that provides protective factors for them. So that could be supportive people, a network of supportive people, even their own attitude, the way that they look at things, their outlook on things can be important as well. Prior experiences of challenges that was resolved successfully. So what's their resilience in that space? That's important. Safety, self-esteem, positive parenting experiences, positive role models, education and skills. So what are the protective factors that exist? So I think that considering protective factors is really important when we're making assessments. So what other people exist in somebody's life that help? So if we go back to think about the previous case study with the lady with Alzheimer's and the husband, if a protective factor might be in that space is that Bill gets to go out several times a week to enjoy some activities, and somebody comes in and provides respite care, or there's that could be an agency, or there could be family. So Bill gets to go away for a weekend once every couple of months, because his daughter comes and stays with her mother. So they're types of things are protective factors for both Bill and for also the wife. Okay, so this is quite a long case study. I'll just leave it on the screen and let you have a read. Let me know when you're ready for me to turn page. There's a little bit more. Okay. Yep. Sorry. Yep. Right. So what do you think? I'll go back to this page because you can. It's got more info on it. But what do you think some of the risk factors might be for this family?
Drug use.
Yep. Drug use. Anything else?
Families interstate.
Yep. So there's less support there. There's no like extended family support.
Homelessness.
Yep. Potential homelessness.
Yep.
Economic stress. Yep. Financial stress. Thanks, Petrus.
I would say the relationship itself, because I don't think they could go for long without having issues.
Yeah, quite possibly. Yeah. So there's a history there of drug use. So Carlos's mum passed away after an excessive drug use problem.
Child with a disability.
Yeah.
Maybe the family might be unable to keep up Sophia's attending to the hospital.
Yeah, that could be. Yep.
Carlos's employment. His boss keeps cutting his hours.
Yep. Yep. So all those things are important. Who do you think out of all that in this family, who do you think is the probably the the one who is most invisible.
Diego.
Yeah, Diego. Yep. So Diego is sort of like gonna be. He's probably the one that doesn't have, or seemingly from the case study information we've got, doesn't have a lot of needs, and is just sort of there. So there's focus on Sophia, but not so much focus on the other child. Do you think there's any protective factors there?
The family of Carlos?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Any others? Anything else, I should say? So they have support. They have sought support and assistance. So that's good. The social worker seems to be involved. So it says over here that social worker has made a point of checking in on her when she's there with Sophia. Maria's been speaking to them about programs. So that's good. They've been seeking some assistance. You said the family. Someone said the family. Yeah. What else is there? Yep. So they're the things that you're sort of weighing up when you're coming to a conclusion about when you're doing an assessment. So you're doing an intake, an assessment. You're thinking about what are the risk factors and what are the protective factors. Okay. Often in situations like this, you consider that Sophia would be potentially at risk, but she seems to have a good. I'm just trying to think of the right word, but she's on the radar. She's not the missing person, if you like, or she's not the invisible person in this family. So that's a good thing. There are, it'd be easy, to read this case study and just concentrate on what all the negatives are. But you can see that there are some, whilst there are risk factors, there are also some other protective factors. So when we're considering an assessment, we're thinking about, well, what are the risk factors? What are the protective factors? And how do we weigh these up and work out what's needed and what's not needed in that space? When we're thinking about this, we've got to think about there's the trauma-informed lens for this family. So there's obviously indications of trauma for this family. There's like the death of a mother. There's a child with a disability. There's injury to Carlos. So when we're thinking about that trauma-informed lens, we're thinking about what's actually happened here and what is impacting on this family and why do we need to take that into account. And so we need to think about, again, those principles of trauma-informed care, which is around your safety, trust, empowerment, and choice and collaboration. They become really important in the space. All right, well, we've got through that pretty quickly, which is okay. That just lets me know next week I just will add a little bit more in so we go longer. And if you think of a few more things, it's all trial and error. Fairly new subject, this one for me as well. So what I will just remind everybody, and I think it's not necessarily an issue for, well, it might be, don't know. Anyway, don't forget, part of you've got to do activities and respond to activities every week. Okay, I'm keeping a record. You've got the whole semester to make sure that you've replied to every week's, but don't leave it till week 10 to decide, oh shit, I've got to go back, excuse my expression, but I've got to go back and start from week 1 to start answering, because you'll just get overwhelmed and you won't do it. So keep on top of it. In about week 3, if I'm concerned, if you don't seem to be on track, I'll make contact and let you know. But try to keep on top of that part of your assessment. They're easy marks. It's keeping by doing it, you're actually involved in the content of the week to week. So it's sort of in a way, not, I won't use the word force, but it gives you a motivation, if you like, to be looking at the weekly content on the Moodle and answering those questions. Well, not answering the questions, but participating and learning from others. Okay, so that's really important as well. All right, so is there any questions? Everyone's happy?
How many activities do we have to do every week?
I think you've got to do 2 original and respond to 2.
Okay, so 2 of your own and responding to 2. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yep. I think you're pretty right at the moment, Amanda.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's what you got to do. All right. Okay, well, we'll let it go for tonight, and I'll see you all next week.
Thank you.
Okay, bye for now.